The gunshot
So
echoed
I
across
was like,
Redemption, Arizona like thunder breaking the dawn.
Can you help me?
Mason Calloway stood in the dusty street, Colt still smoking in his weathered hand. At his feet, a horse thief writhed, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between desperate fingers. Two more thieves fled, kicking up dust as they abandoned their wounded companion. "Next time I won't aim for the shoulder," Mason said, his voice as dry as the Arizona air. The fallen man nodded frantically, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on his face. Sheriff Jenkins approached slowly, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Calloway, can't say I'm surprised to see you in the middle of this. Those boys tried to take your prize stallion. Third attempt this month." Mason holstered his weapon with practiced precision. Droughts making desperate men. The townsfolk watching from doorways and behind wagons began to disperse, some nodding with respect toward Mason. At 42, the former Union lieutenant carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had survived both war and peace. His face, weathered by sun and hardship, rarely betrayed emotion, but his eyes, sharp blue under the brim of his hat, missed nothing. Mason had come to Arizona after the war, using his military pay to build Callaway Ranch from nothing. 50 acres, 60 head of cattle, 15 horses, and most importantly, water rights to Silver Creek. 3 years ago, his wife Rebecca had died from fever, leaving him alone on land that suddenly felt too vast for one man. As Mason gathered his supplies from the general store, he overheard whispers about Apache troubles and savages from a group of settlers. The worst drought in 30 years had pushed both ranchers and tribes to desperation, inflaming old hatreds. Mason kept his opinions to himself. He'd seen enough bloodshed in the war to last several lifetimes. Loading his wagon with ammunition, flour, and coffee, Mason paused at a commotion near the livery stable. A crowd had gathered around something or someone. Curiosity drew him closer. Behind a cattle gate, a woman stood, not inside with the livestock, but behind the wooden posts as if she herself were property. A rope stretched across the gate kept her in place. She was Apache, early 20s perhaps, with long black hair falling past her shoulders. Her doeskin dress was torn along the side and across the chest, exposing more than modesty allowed. Iron shackles had left angry red welts on her wrists, one still trailing a short length of chain. Despite her condition, she stood straight-backed, chin raised, eyes forward. No pleading, no cowering, just silent dignity amidst indignity. "What's going on here?" Mason asked no one in particular. A man leaning against the fence post spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Army rounded up some Apaches. This one's leftover. Nobody claimed her." "Claimed her? She don't speak English, or pretends not to. No tribes come forward for her. Sheriff says she'll be shipped east eventually." "Why is she still here then?" Mason pressed. The man looked at Mason sideways. "Takes money to send her off. Government won't pay. Sheriff won't use county funds." He shrugged. "Someone's got to want her bad enough to pay." Mason studied the woman more closely. The bruises under her right eye, the dried blood on her lip, the dirt on her collarbone. Something in her unwavering stare unsettled him. Not fear or anger, but a resigned expectation, as if she already knew what men would do and no longer cared. "How much?" Mason heard himself ask. The man blinked. "What?" "How much for her release?" "You serious, Calloway?" Mason reached into his pouch and pulled out a small coin sack. "Silver coins enough?" The man hesitated, then took the coins. "No refunds." Mason nodded once. Unlatched the gate. The hinges creaked. The chain on the woman's wrist rattled softly. She hadn't flinched. "I'm not going to touch you," Mason said, his voice low. "You walk on your own." No response, but she stepped out, one bare foot, then the other. Up close, the smell hit. Smoke, sweat, days without a wash. Her eyes were dark and unmoving. As Mason turned to lead her to his wagon, a voice called out, "Calloway, I heard you were in the market for something exotic." Silas Morgan stood nearby, thumbs hooked in an expensive vest. At 55, Morgan owned the largest ranch in the county, 3,000 acres and 200 head of cattle. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, his boots polished despite the dusty streets. His smile never reached his eyes. "I was looking to purchase her myself," Morgan continued. "Need someone to work the house now that my wife's sister has gone back east." Mason kept his face neutral. "She's not for sale." "Everything has a price, Calloway. I'll give you double what you paid." "She's not merchandise, Morgan." Morgan's smile tightened. "You've always been a problem, Calloway. A man who doesn't understand his place." His eyes flickered to the Apache woman, who stood motionless, watching. "That piece of dry land you call a ranch won't sustain you through this drought. And now you're taking in savages?" He shook his head. "Careful, Lieutenant. A man like you shouldn't make too many enemies." Mason didn't respond. He walked to his wagon, not looking back to see if the woman followed. She did, climbing in without assistance. As they drove away from Redemption, Mason felt the weight of what he'd done. He hadn't planned this. Hell, he barely exchanged words with folks in town, let alone brought home strays. But something about her standing there, unclaimed, alone, it had awakened something he thought long dead. Not pity exactly. Recognition, perhaps. They rode in silence until the sun hung low in the western sky. The road to Calloway Ranch was rougher than usual. The drought had hardened the ruts into stone. Mason kept his eyes forward, but he could feel her presence behind him, the weight of her in the wagon bed. "You got a name?" he finally asked, not expecting an answer. Several seconds of silence passed. Then, "Sarah." Mason glanced back, surprised. "You speak English." Her face remained impassive. "Some." "I'm Mason Calloway. That's my ranch up ahead." She said nothing more, just watched the landscape with alert eyes. The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise. A weathered single-story house with a stone chimney, a red barn with one panel missing from the upper loft, and two smaller outbuildings. Simple, square, functional. Beyond the buildings, a creek bed, more dust than water now, cut across the property. The cattle pen stood empty. Mason had moved the herd to higher pasture where grass still grew. Mason pulled the wagon around back. "House is this way," he said, stepping down. He offered a hand, but she climbed down unaided, her movements deliberate and graceful despite her condition. Inside, the house smelled of dust and pine. Mason lit the stove, set water to boil. Sarah hovered just inside the threshold, scanning everything: the ceiling, the windows, the wall hooks, the rifle mounted above the fireplace. "You hungry?" Mason asked, pulling beans and salted pork from the cupboard. Sarah didn't answer, but she sat on a wooden stool near the corner, keeping her knees together, arms folded, back straight. Mason prepared a simple meal, set two bowls on the table. He sat first. She didn't move. "Food's getting cold," he said. She looked at him, then at the bowl. "Salt," she said, just that word. Mason pushed the salt cellar toward her. She took it, shook once, ate with small, careful bites. As night fell, Mason laid a quilt on the bed in the small back room. "You sleep there," he said. "I'll take the chair." Sarah didn't argue. She lay down stiffly, still in the torn dress. Mason didn't undress. He sat in the chair beside the stove, boots on, arms crossed. Sleep didn't come quickly. Mason kept thinking about the look in her eyes when she'd asked for salt. Not fear, just need. He'd expected resistance, panic, maybe anger, but she was just quiet, like him. Outside, the wind picked up, bringing the smell of rain that wouldn't fall. Mason closed his eyes, listening to Sarah's steady breathing from the next room. The attack came at dawn. Mason woke to a whispered warning. Sarah standing over him, finger to her lips. Men, she said softly. 2. Apache. Before he could reach for his rifle, the door burst open. 2 warriors rushed in, knives drawn. Mason rolled from the chair, narrowly avoiding a blade that slashed where his chest had been. He grabbed his shotgun from beside the door, but one warrior kicked it from his hands. Mason ducked another strike, caught the man's wrist and slammed him into the wall. The second warrior came at him from behind. Sarah shouted something in Apache, harsh, commanding words. Both warriors froze. More words followed, rapid and intense. The warriors looked from Sarah to Mason, confusion and anger battling on their faces. One spoke back to her, gesturing at Mason with his knife. "They think you captured me," Sarah explained, her English suddenly fluent. "They came to free me." "Tell them I paid for your freedom," Mason said, not taking his eyes off the warriors. "From the white men in town," Sarah translated. The warriors listened, skepticism evident in their posture. The older one spoke again, his tone accusatory. "He asks why a white man would free an Apache woman." Mason met the warrior's gaze. "Because I've seen enough people in chains." After Sarah translated, the warriors exchanged looks. The younger one sheathed his knife. The older hesitated, then did the same. With final, wary glances at Mason, they backed out the door and disappeared into the lightning dawn. Mason exhaled slowly, rubbing his bruised wrist. "You speak English well." "My father was a scout for the army before they killed him." Mason nodded. No need to ask who they were. "Why didn't you go with them?" Sarah's face betrayed nothing. "I need to find my brother first. Wind River. He was taken north." "And you think staying with me helps that?" "You have a horse." "Guns. I have nothing." Her hand moved to her side, wincing slightly. Mason noticed. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." "Let me see." She hesitated, then slowly lifted the edge of her dress, revealing a deep wound along her ribs, poorly bandaged with strips of cloth. "Bayonet," she said, as if describing the weather, "when they took our camp." Mason's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough battlefield wounds to recognize infection setting in. "Sit down. I need to clean that." To his surprise, she obeyed. Mason retrieved his medical kit, supplies left over from his army days. As he cleaned the wound, Sarah didn't flinch, though the pain must have been considerable. "Army killed everyone?" he asked quietly. "Most. Women. Children. The men were hunting. When they returned," she trailed off. "My brother survived. I heard soldiers say they took him to Fort Davidson." Mason applied a poultice of herbs, a remedy he'd learned from a Cherokee scout during the war. "Fort Davidson is 2 days' ride north," he said, "but they don't just release prisoners." "I know." Her eyes met his. "Why did you buy my freedom?" Mason worked in silence for a moment. "Seemed wrong," he finally said, "leaving you there." "Many things are wrong. White men don't usually care." "I'm not most men." She studied him. "No, you're not." Over the next week, Sarah's wound began to heal. She helped around the ranch, fetching water, mending fences, cooking simple meals. They worked mostly in silence, each respecting the other's space. At night, Mason still slept in the chair, Sarah in the back room. One evening, Mason returned from checking the herd to find Sarah examining his rifle. "You know how to use that?" he asked. "I can hunt," she replied, "but not with this." Mason took the rifle, checked it was unloaded, and handed it back to her. "Sight down the barrel. Line up with what you want to hit." She followed his instructions, her form natural. "Like a bow, but farther." "And louder," Mason added. "Tomorrow I'll teach you to shoot. Might come in handy." Sarah nodded. "I will teach you to track like Apache. This will come in handy when Silas Morgan's men come." Mason raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think Morgan's men are coming?" Men like him don't let things go. She set the rifle down. Especially when they want what you have. You think he wants you that badly? Sarah gave him a look that made him feel foolish. Not me. Your water. Your land. She pointed toward the eastern ridge. The silver. What silver? In the rocks there. That's why the army attacked our camp. We were too close to their mine. Her eyes were steady. That's why Morgan wants this land. Mason considered this new information. If true, it explained Morgan's persistent offers to buy his property over the years. The drought had dropped the creek level, possibly exposing veins that had been hidden underwater. How do you know there's silver? My people have lived here for generations. We know what shines in the dark places. That night, Mason checked his ammunition supply and cleaned his weapons. If Sarah was right, trouble was coming. As days passed, Mason and Sarah fell into an easy rhythm. She learned to handle his firearms with surprising skill, and in return, she taught him how to move silently through the brush, how to read animal tracks, how to spot signs of intruders long before they arrived. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. Mason found himself watching her when she didn't notice. The way she moved with natural grace, the quiet strength in her hands, the rare moments when something close to a smile would touch her lips. She was becoming less of a stranger, less of a burden, and more of something he wasn't ready to name. One evening as they sat side by side, Sarah asked, "Why did you come here after the war? To this empty place?" Mason was silent for a long moment, needed space to breathe. After Gettysburg, after Wilderness, there was too much death, too many ghosts. He looked out at the darkening landscape. Out here, a man can build something clean. Start over. Sarah nodded. My father said white men always want to start over. Apache know you carry your past with you, like shadow. He was probably right. You miss her? Your wife? The question surprised him. Every day, but differently now. Less sharp. Sarah's eyes held his and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps. Recognition of shared loss. Pain changes shape, she said softly, but never disappears. Mason nodded. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen. The riders appeared 3 days later. 4 men approaching from the south, dust clouds marking their progress long before they came into view. Mason watched them through his field glasses, Sarah beside him on the porch. Morgan's men, Mason nodded. 2 I recognize from town. Don't know the others. What will you do? Have a conversation. Mason checked his revolver. Stay inside. Sarah's eyes flashed. I will not hide. Wasn't asking you to hide. Just giving me one less thing to worry about. The riders stopped 30 yards from the house. Mason recognized the lead man. Jake Turner, Morgan's foreman, a man with a reputation for solving problems permanently. Calloway, Turner called. Got a message from Mr. Morgan. Mason stepped off the porch. I'm listening. Mr. Morgan's reconsidered his offer on your property, willing to pay triple what it's worth, given the difficult conditions. Turner's eyes drifted to the dried creek bed. Drought's only going to get worse. My answer's the same as before. Not for sale. Turner shifted in his saddle. Mr. Morgan thought you might say that. That's why he asked us to be persuasive. The men behind him spread out slightly. He also mentioned something about an Apache woman, said she's actually an escaped prisoner. Reward for bringing her in. Mason's hand hovered near his holster. She's under my protection. Turner laughed. Protection? From what? The law? He nodded to the men flanking him. We can do this easy or hard, Calloway. Your choice. The first shot came from the house, Sarah firing Mason's Winchester from the window. The bullet kicked up dirt at Turner's horse's feet, causing it to rear. In the moment of confusion, Mason drew and fired, hitting one of Turner's men in the chest. The man fell from his horse without a sound. Turner and the remaining men scattered, taking cover behind rocks and scrub. Gunfire erupted, bullets splintering wood around Mason as he dove behind a water trough. Sarah continued firing from the house, forcing the attackers to keep their heads down. Mason used the opportunity to move to the barn, giving him a better angle. He took careful aim and fired twice. Another man fell. "Turner," Mason shouted, "tell Morgan if he wants my land, he'll have to come himself." A bullet whined past Mason's ear, close enough that he felt its heat. He ducked lower. From inside the house, Sarah's rifle fell silent. Mason's heart raced. Had she been hit? Suddenly, Sarah appeared behind Turner's position, moving like a shadow. Before the man could turn, she drove a knife into his shoulder. Turner screamed, dropping his gun. The last rider, seeing his companions dead or wounded, spurred his horse and fled. Mason approached Turner, who was cursing and clutching his bleeding shoulder. Sarah stood over him, knife ready. "That's enough," Mason told her. "He's done." Sarah's eyes burned. "He would kill us both." "Maybe, but we're not him." Mason kicked Turner's gun away. "You ride back to Morgan. Tell him what happened here. Tell him next time I won't be so merciful." Turner glared at them both but nodded. Mason helped him onto his horse, none too gently. As Turner rode away, Mason turned to Sarah. "Where did you learn to move like that?" A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Apache don't need to be taught to be silent." That night they sat on the porch, passing a bottle of whiskey between them. The stars were bright overhead, the air finally cool after the blistering day. "Morgan will send more men," Sarah said. "I know. Why not sell this place? Find somewhere without silver, without trouble." Mason looked out over the land, parched now, but still his. "This land is all I have left. After the war, everything was broken inside me." He took another drink. "Building this place fixed something. I can't explain it." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "My people understand connection to land." She pointed to the stars. "The spirits of our ancestors walk here. They whisper in the wind. They are home." She looked at him. "This is your home." "Yes," Mason said simply. Sarah nodded. "Then we defend it." Her hand found his in the darkness. Tentative at first, then certain. Mason's rough fingers intertwined with hers. They sat that way for a long time, the night air cooling around them, their shared warmth bridging the space between two worlds. The next morning, Mason taught Sarah how to shoot his revolver. She learned quickly, her natural hunting instincts translating well to firearms. In return, she showed him how to move silently across rocky terrain, how to read subtle signs in the landscape, how to set traps that would alert them to intruders. They worked together, preparing the ranch for defense, boarding windows, positioning ammunition caches, establishing escape routes. Through shared labor and common purpose, the distance between them diminished daily. One evening, as Mason cleaned his rifle on the porch, Sarah sat beside him, closer than usual. "Why did you never remarry?" she asked. "After your wife died." Mason's hand stilled on the gun barrel. "Never found the right reason, I suppose." "Is there a right reason?" He considered the question. "For me, there would have to be. Something more than just not wanting to be alone." Sarah nodded slowly. "Among my people, a widow might take a new husband for protection or children, but the best unions are those of spirit." Her eyes met his. "Two souls who recognize each other." The weight of her words hung in the air between them. Mason set the rifle aside and turned to face her. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. Sarah leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "I didn't expect this," Mason said softly. "Nor did I." She placed her hand over his. "But here we are." Mason leaned forward, hesitant. Sarah met him halfway. Their kiss was gentle, tentative, a question asked and answered in the same breath. When they parted, something had changed between them, a threshold crossed that neither could return from. "This won't be easy," Mason said. "People in town—" "I stopped caring what white men think long ago," Sarah interrupted. "Except one." A week later, they rode into Redemption for supplies. Mason knew it was risky, but they needed ammunition. Sarah wore clean clothes now, an old shirt of Mason's tucked into a pair of work pants, her hair tied back. She still drew stares, but met each one with unflinching dignity. In the general store, Mason was loading supplies when Sheriff Jenkins entered. "Calloway," the sheriff nodded, then his eyes settled on Sarah. "Heard you took in an Apache woman. News travels fast." "Small town." Jenkins lowered his voice. "Got a telegraph from Fort Davidson yesterday. Seems they're missing a prisoner. Apache woman who killed 2 soldiers during a raid. Description matches your guest." Mason kept his face neutral. "Sarah's under my protection. She might be a murderer, Calloway, or she might be defending herself from men who slaughtered her people." Mason's voice hardened. "Either way, she's with me now." Jenkins sighed. "There's a bounty, $100. Word gets out, every bounty hunter for 3 states will come looking." As if on cue, the door opened. A tall man in a dusty duster stepped in, eyes scanning the store before settling on Sarah. His right hand drifted toward his holster. "That her?" he asked Jenkins. "The Apache with the bounty?" Jenkins looked uncomfortable. "Now listen, Davis." The bounty hunter drew his gun, but Mason was faster. His first shot caught Davis in the arm, spinning him around. His second shot wasn't necessary. Davis was already stumbling backward, falling into a display of canned goods. The store fell silent. Mason kept his gun trained on Davis, who clutched his bleeding arm, eyes wide with shock. "Anyone else interested in collecting a bounty?" Mason asked the stunned onlookers. No one moved. "Didn't think so." He holstered his weapon and turned to Sarah. "Let's go." Outside, Mason loaded the last of their supplies while Sarah kept watch, hand on the knife at her belt. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "Now you're marked too." "I was already marked," Mason replied. "Have been since the war." On the ride back to the ranch, Sarah was quieter than usual. Finally, she spoke. "Why risk everything for me? I am nothing to you." Mason considered her question. "During the war, I saw men do terrible things. Things that break something inside you." He guided the horses around a boulder. "After a while, you start to think maybe that's all there is. Just people doing terrible things to each other." He glanced at her. "But then sometimes you get a chance to do something different." Sarah nodded slowly. "My father used to say, how we act when the storm comes shows who we truly are." Wise man. "Yes." Her voice softened. "He would have respected you." When they returned to the ranch, Mason found something tucked into one of their supply bags. A wanted poster with Sarah's face crudely drawn on it, and beneath it, a note. "Silver Creek Mine Company claims all land with water rights. Trespassers will be removed." Morgan's working with the mining company, Mason realized. Sarah examined the poster. "And the Army." That night, Mason spotted smoke signals rising from the eastern ridge. Sarah translated their meaning. Apache warriors were nearby, and they were warning of soldiers approaching from the north. "Your brother?" Mason asked. "Perhaps." Sarah's face showed a flicker of hope. "If he escaped." The next morning, they saw 3 Apache riders approaching from the east. Mason and Sarah waited on the porch. Mason's rifle across his knees, not threatening, but ready. The lead rider was a tall man with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. He dismounted 20 paces from the house, his companions staying on their horses. Sarah stepped forward. Wind River, she breathed. The man's stern face softened briefly. They spoke rapidly in Apache, then embraced. When they separated, Wind River looked at Mason with unconcealed suspicion. "My sister says you freed her," he said in accented English. "Why?" "Seemed like the right thing to do," Mason answered simply. Wind River studied him. "White men rarely do the right thing without reason." "I've learned the same about all men," Mason replied, "regardless of color." A hint of respect flickered in Wind River's eyes. He turned back to Sarah, speaking again in their language. Sarah's expression grew serious. She nodded several times, then turned to Mason. "The army's coming," she said. 20 soldiers, led by Captain Brooks. They're working with the Silver Creek Mine Company and Silas Morgan. Mason absorbed this news. "When?" "Tomorrow at dawn," Wind River answered. "They will claim this land for the mine. Anyone here will be killed or arrested." "Why are you telling me this?" Mason asked. Wind River exchanged a look with Sarah. "My sister has chosen to stay with you. I do not understand this choice, but I respect her." His eyes hardened. "And I have scores to settle with Captain Brooks." "You're offering to help?" Wind River nodded once. "For my sister and for justice." That afternoon, Mason, Sarah, and Wind River prepared for battle. The other Apache warriors brought 5 more men, all that remained of their band after the army's raids. They set traps along the likely approach, positioned shooters at strategic points, and prepared escape routes if things went wrong. As night fell, Mason found Sarah at the creek bed, washing her hands in one of the few remaining pools of water. "Your brother doesn't trust me," Mason said. "He doesn't trust any white man." She dried her hands on her pants. "But he respects that I chose to stay." "Why did you choose to stay?" Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, as if seeing past his weathered exterior to something deeper. "Because you see me, not Apache, not woman, just me." She stepped closer. "No one has done that since my father died." Mason felt something shift between them, a boundary dissolving. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand cupped her cheek, rough fingers against smooth skin. She leaned into his touch. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said softly, "I'm glad you stayed." "I will fight beside you," she replied, "until the end." They returned to the house hand in hand, the weight of tomorrow's battle temporarily held at bay by the certainty they'd found in each other. Dawn broke blood red over the eastern ridge. Mason stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the horizon. Sarah emerged from the house, rifle ready. Wind River and his warriors were already in position, hidden among the rocks overlooking the approach. "They're coming," Sarah said, pointing to a dust cloud in the distance. Mason nodded. "Remember the plan. We let them get close, spring the traps, then drive them back. No heroics." Sarah gave him a look that was almost amused. "Says the man who shot a bounty hunter in town." Despite the tension, Mason smiled. It felt strange on his face. He hadn't smiled much since Rebecca died. The riders appeared, 20 soldiers in blue uniforms, led by a captain with a handlebar mustache. Behind them rode Silas Morgan and 2 men in suits, mining company representatives most likely. Mason took a deep breath, then stepped off the porch into the open. Sarah flanked him, rifle at her side. Captain Brooks raised his hand, halting the column. "Mason Calloway?" he called. "That's right." Brooks produced a document. "By order of the territorial governor, this land has been claimed by the Silver Creek Mining Company under eminent domain. You are ordered to vacate immediately." "This land is deeded to me," Mason replied. "Signed by the same governor 5 years ago." "Circumstances have changed." Brooks nodded to the suited men. "Silver deposits have been discovered. The territory needs the revenue." "And what about the Apache land you've been seizing? Was that for revenue too?" Brooks' expression darkened. The savages have been relocated for their own protection. After you massacred half their people? Watch yourself, Calloway. Brooks' hand moved to his holster. You're harboring a fugitive. That Apache woman is wanted for murder. Self-defense isn't murder, Mason said, and this land is still mine. Morgan nudged his horse forward. Be reasonable, Calloway. Take the compensation and leave. Like the compensation you offered the Apache? Mason's voice was steel. No deal. Brooks signaled his men. Sergeant, arrest Mr. Calloway and the Apache woman. If they resist, the first trap sprung a tripwire the soldiers had missed. A deadfall of rocks crashed down, startling the horses and throwing two soldiers to the ground. In the confusion, Wind River and his warriors opened fire from the ridge. The battle erupted in earnest. Mason and Sarah fell back to the house, firing from protected positions. Soldiers scattered, some returning fire, others seeking cover. Brooks shouted orders, trying to organize a charge. Morgan and the mining men retreated to a safe distance, watching as their plan fell apart. Two more traps activated, a pit that caught a soldier's horse, and a rope snare that yanked another soldier off his mount. The Apache warriors moved positions constantly, making it impossible for the soldiers to determine their numbers. Mason's accurate rifle fire kept the soldiers from approaching the house. Sarah, moving with preternatural speed, circled behind a group of soldiers taking cover behind a rock outcropping. Her knife claimed one before they realized she was there. Her rifle took another as he turned. Captain Brooks, seeing his force being decimated, organized the remaining soldiers for a desperate charge on the house. They rushed forward, bullets flying. Mason met them on the porch. Shotgun blasting. Two soldiers fell. A third's bullet grazed Mason's arm. Sarah appeared at his side, firing steadily. Wind River engaged Brooks directly, their fight becoming hand-to-hand when both men's guns emptied. The Apache warrior was quicker, but the captain was stronger. They crashed through the rail of the porch, tumbling into the dust. Mason turned to help, but Silas Morgan had finally entered the fray, rifle aimed at Mason's chest. Before he could fire, Sarah's knife embedded itself in his shoulder. Morgan screamed, dropping his weapon. The remaining soldiers, seeing their captain locked in combat and half their force down, began to retreat. The mining representatives had already fled. Wind River gained the upper hand, pinning Brooks to the ground, knife at his throat. For my people, he said grimly. Wait, Mason called, stepping toward them. We need him alive. Wind River's eyes blazed. Why? He ordered the death of our families. And if you kill him, the army will never stop hunting you, Mason replied. But if he lives to face justice for working with the mining company against the law, he met Wind River's gaze. Sometimes living with shame is worse than death. After a long moment, Wind River removed his knife from Brooks's throat. Instead, he carved a symbol into the man's cheek, a mark that would forever identify him as an enemy of the Apache. He will remember, Wind River said, standing, and so will others. As the dust settled, Mason surveyed the damage. The house had taken multiple bullets but stood firm. 3 Apache warriors had been wounded, none fatally. Mason's arm would need stitches. Sarah moved among the wounded with water and bandages. Morgan sat slumped against a wheel of his wagon, his face pale from blood loss, the fight gone from him. Brooks lay bound with 2 other captured soldiers. 2 weeks after the battle, a U.S. marshal arrived at Calloway Ranch with a small contingent of federal officers. By then, Mason had collected all the evidence. The mining company documents, Morgan's correspondence with Captain Brooks, witness statements from the town about Morgan's threats. The marshal, a grizzled veteran named Harker, reviewed everything in Mason's kitchen. Damned mess, he finally said. But you've got enough here to hang Morgan and Brooks both. Not looking for hanging, Mason replied. Just justice, Harker nodded. Morgan's already been charged with conspiracy and attempted murder. His ranch has been seized by the federal government. He took a sip of coffee. Brooks is facing court-martial. The Army doesn't appreciate officers using military force for private interests. And the bounty on Sarah? Officially rescinded. Harker studied Sarah, who stood nearby. The territorial governor has granted her amnesty, considering the circumstances. And the silver? Sarah asked. Harker sighed. That's the complicated part. The mining company had legitimate claims to some lands, but not yours, Calloway. The governor is proposing a compromise, controlled mining rights with fair compensation to landowners, including set-asides for the remaining Apache. It wasn't perfect, but it was more than Mason had expected. After Harker left, Wind River's band set up a permanent camp near the eastern boundary of Calloway Ranch. Not on the property, but close enough for protection. An uneasy peace formed, not friendship, but respect. In Redemption, things changed too. Some folks still crossed the street when they saw Mason and Sarah coming, but others nodded in greeting. Word had spread about how they'd stood against corruption. The new sheriff, elected after Jenkins resigned in disgrace, even tipped his hat to them. The first rain in 6 months fell 3 weeks after the battle. It began as a soft patter on the roof, then grew to a steady downpour that sent Mason and Sarah running for the porch. They stood watching as water flowed into the creek bed, bringing life back to the parched earth. "Your ancestors sending a message?" Mason asked, gesturing to the rain. Sarah smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Perhaps, or perhaps just good timing. That evening, Mason found Sarah carving something into the main gatepost. She stepped back as he approached, revealing 2 symbols side by side, one representing the Calloway brand, the other an Apache protection mark. 2 worlds, she said simply. 1 home. Mason nodded, understanding all she didn't say. From his pocket, he pulled a small silver band, simple, unadorned, but gleaming in the fading light. "I had this made in town," he said, suddenly awkward. "It's not fancy, but—" "It's perfect," Sarah interrupted, taking it from his palm. "I don't know your customs," Mason admitted, "but in mine this means a promise." "We have promises too." She slid the ring onto her finger. Different words, same meaning. Mason took her hand in his. Behind them the land stretched out, no longer parched but renewed. Silver Creek ran full again, catching the last light of day. In the distance, smoke rose from Wind River's camp, not a signal this time, but a cook fire, signs of life returning. "What now?" Sarah asked, leaning against him. Mason looked out over the ranch. Their ranch now. "We rebuild. We grow." His arm encircled her waist. "We remember." The sun slipped behind the western ridge, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Mason and Sarah stood on their porch watching darkness gather. Not afraid, not alone, but together. 2 lives intersecting against all odds. 2 worlds becoming one. And as the first stars appeared overhead, they stepped inside their home, closing the door on the past and opening it to whatever might come.